So thank you everybody for coming in tonight. We have, I don't see Matt signed in yet. We've got Lee Kluck on, who's going to talk about a book he's working on Harry Dalton. And we are very honored tonight to not only have Lee talking about Harry Dalton, but Harry's wife, Pat, is also joining us tonight. So thank you, Pat. Thank you, Lee. Little bio of Lee. Lee is a historian from Stevens Point. He graduated from UW Eau Claire with a master's in history and is an avid baseball fan. He contributed to several SABR projects, including Harvey's Wallbangers on the 82 Brewers. From the Braves to the Brewers, the great games and exciting history at Milwaukee County Stadium. In the 1986 New York Mets, there was more than game 6 to throw. So thank you, Lee, for joining us.
Absolutely.
Before we get started, I'm going to mute everybody and then unmute you. You are unmuted, I think. Okay. Lee, I've got to start out the meeting to get to know you.
Yep.
Sorry, just got a note there. I'd like to start out with 2 questions. The first, and I don't think I gave you these. I try not to give them out ahead of time. The first question is, what is your earliest baseball memory?
You want us to answer that?
I'm asking that of Lee, but he's muted. Lee, can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Done. All right.
So your earliest baseball memory, Lee?
Yeah, my earliest baseball memory. My earliest baseball memory, honestly, would be, probably took place in the 85 or 86 season. And I can remember watching Milwaukee and their teams go to places like Kansas City and the turf that used to be at Royal Stadium, and the fountains and things like that, and watching guys like Kevin Seitzer and Flash Gordon play Milwaukee. That was probably one of my earlier memories, if any.
Okay. And favorite team and ball player? I have a feeling we know the team. Favorite ball player?
My favorite team these days is I have 2.
Let me read my question. Favorite ball player and team when you were age 12?
Okay, that's still pretty easy. My favorite ball player when I was 12 would probably be somebody that Harry drafted. Was a guy by the name of Cal Eldred.
Okay.
And I love pitchers. I love pitching. So Cal Eldred would probably have been my favorite. And obviously the Brewers at that time, when I was 12, was the summer that they won 92 games and almost made the playoffs in 92.
Yep.
So that was a good time for me. It was sort of my baseball summer where I listened every day and consumed it like crazy. So
good. I like that. Well, I'm just going to ask you a question, and you're off and running from this question. So go wherever
okay.
you. Why are you writing a book on Harry Dalton?
Well, to give you an idea of why I'm writing a book on Harry, I first got to talk about the germination of this project. One day I was sitting at work. I worked for a major insurance company, and I was sitting at work. And as people are wont to do during the course of their workday, the mind drifted a little bit, and it drifted to the Brewers of my youth and the thought process of, man, I know those teams had serious financial trouble after a while. How did they stay competitive? Or were they competitive at all? Do I just misremember that those teams, especially in the late 80s, were highly competitive and won a lot of games? As I looked at it, being a historian, I kind of looked at it, I deep dove the question, And I came to the realization that part of the reason that Milwaukee was good for so long, even though they didn't make the playoffs after 82, was the fact that Harry Dalton had put in place a structure that facilitated that success, whether that be grooming future players in the minor leagues or instituting a sort of a temperament at the big league level that made them competitive. So I thought, well, maybe I can write a small book about Harry from 83 on, because I really feel that the Brewers from 83 on are underrepresented in historiography. Everybody knows the 82 Brewers. It's a great swing moment in the history of the franchise. But what they don't take into account is that especially from 83 to 92, they were very good. We gloss over that. In fact, I think most people would remember that they were worse in the mid 90s than they were better in the mid 80s. So I said, okay, I'll write a small book about Harry and how he did things. And one day I was reading a obituary in the Phoenix paper, and it had an email address at the bottom. And I had talked to like one person at that time. I think I had talked to Tom Trebelhorn, who lives out in Scottsdale. And Tom was nice enough to give me an interview and discuss sort of his tenure with the Brewers and working with Harry. And I found this email address to a business in Scottsdale that is run by Harry's oldest daughter, Kim, Harry and Pat's oldest daughter, Kim. And I called her up on the phone and I said, "Are you the daughter of Harry Dalton, the baseball executive?" And she goes, "Absolutely." I says, "I would like to write a book about your dad." And that started a whirlwind process that continues to this day. Within that day, I had talked to all 4 Dalton girls, Pat and her 3 daughters, and I take the claim to fame that I had made them all cry in the same day when I told them I was going to write a book. Fast forward about 2 months, pretty soon they had gotten me in touch with all of these different people that had no connection to Harry in Milwaukee at all. Bobby Grich in California, just a host of people. And Andy Etchebarren, who played for the late Andy Etchebarren, who had played for Harry in Baltimore. And one night I'm watching the playoffs and I called Kim, because it's late in Phoenix and it's 10, 11 o'clock here in Wisconsin. And I said, "Man, I got a lot of stuff." She goes, "Yeah, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, that's what I got to talk to you about." I said, "Ask everybody if I can just write a full biography. Because to really understand Harry Dalton and understand his place in history and understand how he got to Milwaukee and the things that he used in Milwaukee, you really have to understand where he came from." And what I came to find out was that he is really important, not only for the winning that he did throughout his career, but the fact that he was I spoke to a Commissioner Emeritus Selig, and Bud told me that in his mind, Harry was the #1 baseball mind of their generation. That whenever they had a question to ask about the game or where it should go or how it should be conducted, the first place they went was Harry, because he was very intelligent. He was actually a card-carrying member of Mensa and was just, but was very personable, was very down to earth and very willing to just give his opinion, but not in a way that made you feel like he was big timing you, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so since that time, I have worked on a full biography of Harry. This is about the 3rd year that I've worked on it. And it got picked up by the University of Nebraska Press, and I'm really excited to be working with them. And I've talked to some really great people. I've talked to Nolan Ryan, Robin Yount, Ted Simmons, players as far and wide as Joey Meyer and Don August and Glenn Braggs for you Brewer fans. And just it's been a great, very neat experience. And so tonight, I just kind of wanted to talk. I think we all sort of know the stories about Harry's meteoric rise when he got to Milwaukee. For instance, he came to Milwaukee and instituted some things and traded for some people that instantly gave the Brewers credibility. And then in '81, he obviously makes a trade for Ted Simmons and Pete Vukovich, who I've also talked to. Pete's been great to me. Pete normally does not give interviews too often, but he felt that he would be disrespecting Harry if he didn't talk to me, and I've been very grateful for that. He's been very great to me. And so, Harry, he trades for Ted Simmons and Raleigh Fingers and Pete Vukovich, and they have this meteoric rise, and they're galvanized when they hire Harvey Keene to manage at midseason and take off and make the World Series. I think what we've missed out on a lot of times in hearing those stories, because we've heard them so often and we've heard them from players and things. Robin has been very vocal about that time, and Pete is as well, and Gorman Thomas and all these guys, that they give those stories, right? What we don't see is how that stuff came to be, how that trade happened. What was Harry's thoughts on the Brewers when he got there? What was his number one goal when he got there? And that's what I really have enjoyed finding out, and really feel like my book will be different than, say, one that just recaps a person's high points and achievements. The other great thing for me, and just as a side note, is that you find out that Harry Dalton was a really great human being. He was not a guy that was good at his job, but then that came at the sacrifice of his family or his personal relationships with people outside of baseball. He was a very gracious man and a very humble human being. And so that's been really great. Kind of ask, I'm pretty sure that most people are familiar with the trade that did happen, right? Vukovich and Fingers and Ted Simmons coming back to Milwaukee for David Green and Dave LaPointe and Sixto Lascano and a handful of other people. What they don't know, as just a quick aside, is the 182 story that I will tell. What they don't know is that trade almost looked very different. That trade didn't almost happen, for one, and it almost looked very different. The initial trade was going to be Paul Molitor for Bruce Sutter to the Cubs, straight up. One for one. And everybody who advised Harry, and he had a host of just wonderful advisors and interesting guys in their own right. Walter Shannon, who had worked for Harry in Baltimore and had also worked for the Cardinals. Walter Yaus, Ray Pointerman, all these guys, they all sat in a room and said, you know what? We can get Bruce Sutter, trade Paul Molitor. Now, how different, right, would Milwaukee's situation have looked without Paul Molitor in the lineup for the next 15 years? It would have just been, I can't even fathom that. So everybody says, hey, we should do this. And Harry goes, and the reporters asked Harry about it. They said, Harry, what do you think? He goes, well, everybody thinks we should make this deal, but you know what? I'm the last vote. So I'm going to go home and sleep on it. And he went home and slept on it and was like, no, we're not going to do that. And then it came out that he could work a deal with St. Louis to get, because obviously now they had 2 all-star closers. They had an abundance of pitching, and it turned out that they could work Ted Simmons in that deal as well. So then it was, okay, now we can have that deal. And what people don't realize about that deal is it was really polarizing among the Dalton gang. The famous story that was told to me by Tom Skybosh and a few other people was that when they were discussing the trade with St. Louis, Ray Poinevent, who was an international scout and who was big in development, because you got to remember, Harry Dalton was a development guy. He came up as a assistant farm director in Baltimore under Jim McLaughlin. He had been the farm director in Baltimore. So he trusted his scouts. They were his lifeblood when it came to information. So Ray Poinevent is in the meeting, and Harry would always open the floor up for discussion. He wanted guys to defend a point. And I said, so what do you guys think? And Ray Poinevent goes, you are nuts. If you want to trade David Green, he's the best prospect in baseball. You're absolutely crazy. We can't do that. And Ray Scarborough looked at Ray Poinevent and almost knocked him on his butt. They physically had to be separated because Ray Scarborough looked at him and said, you're absolutely crazy the other way. If we trade for these guys, we're going to win now. We can win now. I think what that shows is that Harry Dalton, throughout his entire career, one thing that he did really well, he did a couple of things really well. First off, he was always a good judge of when his team was competitive and when they weren't. So as fans, we say, oh man, they didn't make this trade or they didn't make that trade. Why didn't they make this deal? You know, or they made this deal and it makes no sense. The Brewers made one a couple weeks ago. They got Dan Vogelbach. Nobody had ever heard of him. You know, he had like 2 hits all year. And you go, why do you make that deal? And then you go, oh, well, we were better than we thought, or we weren't as good as we thought. But the GM, especially Harry, he had a good judge of that always. The other thing that Harry always did that was really unique and really good was he did 2 things. He always gave ownership of decisions to the people that worked for him, but he was the last person. He was the person that would take all the heat, and he would be the first person to give all the glory. So when a decision worked out, he would give that and say, well, it was my people. They would, they helped us out and we made the right decision. And, obviously the ball players did their part. And then when things went wrong, Harry was also the first one to go, yeah, you know what, that's on me. He would do that later in his career when he would make deals with, for instance, Franklin Stubbs comes to mind. And Franklin Stubbs, and I see Dennis shaking his head. Franklin Stubbs was the one that kind of broke his back. Later in his career, as the game continued to change, Harry told one of his young assistants, there are not enough $500,000 hits to make up for all the misses. So the problem became not that he had lost knowledge, but that the margin for error was much less. And Stubbs is a great example of that. They signed Stubbs to a contract. They pay him, market value or above market value at the time. He doesn't pan out. You can't unload that contract because of the financial obligations. When you would miss before, you could find the cheaper version to sort of offset that mistake. And Harry really did. He started in the mid to late 80s, early 90s. He really did start to not sour on the game, but he started to really call into question the motivation, I think, for the first time of players. I've heard recordings of clubhouse talks that he's given that are just great. It was the 1991 Brewers, so Gary Sheffield is there and a few hosts of other people. And his comment was, well, we've played 60 games and, I've been waiting to see what this team is made of. And I think I've got a fair idea now, so I'm going to come out and say some things. He goes, you guys don't care about winning. You care about your money. You want your money. You want instant gratification. He goes, you find a girl comes, you need money. You go and you go to the time machine, which was a totally 80s Wisconsin reference for an ATM. It was absolutely fantastic. I laughed. He says, oh, you go to the time machine, you get money for the night, you go out, you might find a girl, she comes home with you, she jumps into bed with you. Instant gratification. What you all don't know is that sometimes you got to work hard to get somewhere. And he says the teams around this league know that we're not going to work hard. So what I want you to do for the next 2 months is work hard, and we're going to try to win the pennant. And so he was always a really good judge of what kind of conversation his team needed. He wasn't a yeller. He wasn't a screamer. He wasn't someone who needed in negotiations to tell a player that they weren't as good as they thought they were. To a man, they all said that he was very fair. He didn't like to part with $1, but he was very fair when he negotiated with players. He would go. The most famous case is actually gave Andy Etchebarren in 1966. He gave Andy Etchebarren a 100% raise on the dance floor of the team World Series party in 1966. He looked at Andy and says, Andy was giving him a hard time. Andy was a coach with him in Milwaukee, as many people remember. Andy was giving him a hard time. And he says, Harry, when are we going to sign my deal? And he goes, how about right now? He goes, come on, we're dancing with our wives, And Andy says, well, we've both been, celebrating and whatever. He goes, come on, right now. And he goes, in fact, if you do it right now, I'll give you 100% raise. They went into a ballroom off the side. He signed a deal for the next year, and that's how Andy Etchebarren made $13,000 his second year in the big leagues after making $6,700 the year before. Pete Vukovich told me a story about how he paid Pete for a year in which Pete didn't really pitch. He had hurt his arm. He had no obligation to pay him. When he came back the second time, Pete obviously had sort of retired, and then he came out of retirement. Harry asked him to come out of retirement because they needed pitching help, and asked him to go down to AAA. And even though he went down to AAA and got a bunch of people out, Pete knew he had nothing left. And he says, so I called Harry and told him, I'm like, Harry, I can't do this. He goes, I can get guys out of AAA all day long. He said, but I can't come up there and help you. And Harry paid him the $40,000 or whatever his contract called for at that time. So he was not the type of guy, even before free agency, who tried to nickel and dime people. He was the thing that helped him keep Milwaukee relevant, I believe, are a couple of things. One is, excuse me. I have an iced tea habit. It gets pretty bad. One of the things that Harry did was the first day he sat down in front of the media and the team in Milwaukee after Bud hired him in 78 was he sat down and he said, we need to get rid of all the losers on this team. All the guys who say we can't win, all the guys who aren't here to win, they're gone. They're done. From the minute he walked in, and Robin Yount and Mike Caldwell have both reiterated this to me. Caldwell says it was a creation of a professionalism, and Robin called it the creation of a business-like approach. They were going out to win every single day, and they were going to do everything as an organization to help them get to the point where they were going to win. And Robin took it a step further and said that was how Milwaukee stayed relevant throughout the 80s and into the early 90s. No matter who came in there, the one constant was Harry Dalton. He knew what kind of player he wanted. He knew what kind of person he wanted. And that was the type of person that he brought in to get, the Brewers on track. The other thing that he did, along with his people, was Harry was an information junkie. He just loved to learn about the game. He wanted all the information. His daughters say he would have hated working today because of the sort of cold environment that it is. But I think he would have thrived today. If he would have been a GM today, he would have been Theo Epstein. Okay, he would have been the young guy who came on and everybody thought he was a wonderkin because he wanted to learn. The first thing he did, I mean, he had started using stats and asking his managers to use stats as far back as the late 60s with Earl Weaver. And when he came to Milwaukee, he looked at the PR department in Milwaukee and said, I want you guys to produce what he called Weaver stats. Breakdowns of every hitter against the pitchers they were going to face. Splits, home, road, night, day, every combination known to man. And then what Harry would do is take that, get himself a manager that was willing to sort of work within those parameters. He likes smart people. That's the thing. People go, how can Harry Dalton work with Earl Weaver? They are like oil and water socially. Except Harry liked smart people and Earl was very smart. He was crass. He was probably a borderline alcoholic, but he was very smart. And Harry could work with that. Same thing in Milwaukee. Tom Trebelhorn was the perfect manager for Harry Dalton later in his career because Treb was a cerebral guy. So Harry tried to take all sorts of different information. They did some of the first work that I've ever seen with sabermetrics. Using advanced metrics to decide, is a player good? Is a player bad? How can we best utilize this person? They were doing this in 1986, 1987. They were also a very cutting edge department under Harry Dalton. He hated computers, couldn't stand them, but he was all about giving the scouts and the baseball people the right equipment to make the right decisions, to feed their information. So I have a memo in Harry's things, and I really am grateful to Pat and Dan Duquette because they went through Harry's things and saved a bunch of great information. If you ever get to the Hall of Fame and want to read some just neat baseball stuff and you're a Brewer fan, getting Harry Dalton and his papers are great. The thing that Harry did was he wanted the people. So I have a memo that, Dan Duquette wrote as a junior member of the front office staff and said, hey, we need to get some personal computers around here for our people. And, and Harry was like, absolutely. The other thing that Harry was willing to do was he was willing to go outside the box when it came to finding players. We all know that Milwaukee had some financial trouble. What I don't think a lot of people realize is that financial trouble started almost immediately after the World Series. As early as 83 or 84. Privately, that financial trouble began. So by 85, 86, 87, there was no money. I've read Harry Dalton's deposition in the collusion case. I unfortunately can't quote it in my book because it's a sealed record, but I can speak on it a little bit here. He was asked whether Milwaukee had an collusion. Of course, is in the mid 80s. Ownership wanted to keep down free agent prices, so they colluded with each other to not, sign anyone. Harry was deposed, and he was asked the question, "Do you have a policy for free agents?" And he goes, "Oh, we don't sign free agents." And the person asking the question goes, "Okay, are you telling me that you have a policy as a team not to sign free agents?" And he goes, "Yes, but it's not for what you think. It's not because I don't want to. It's because we can't afford to." And so even as early as 1986, 87, they were not signing free agents. The big names were not on their radar as much as Harry had wanted them to be. So what are you going to do? You're going to have to draft really great. And from 85 to 87, they had the best farm system in baseball. Baseball America ranked them number one each year, 85, 86, 87. He had some great baseball people. Bruce Mano, a host of different scouts, Ray Poinevent, Walter Shannon, who was in his 70s, was working, Walter Yaus. And they found guys who were big league talent, at least looked like they were going to be big league talent, you know. Say what you will about Gary and Harry had more than their share of problems. But Harry and his guys knew that Gary Sheffield was going to be a Hall of Famer. They knew he was going to be a 5-tool player that would play every day in the big leagues. You know, there were names that they didn't hit on so much, but they thought they had good picks, you know, Joey Meyer, all these different people, and they were snake bitten by injuries, but they would go into, you know, the one thing was is they didn't just go into your run-of-the-mill domestic markets. They recruited heavily in Hawaii. They recruited, or they scouted heavily in Hawaii. They scouted heavily in Latin America. And that was because Harry knew that he needed to go other places for players. And that is really how they did well. So I'm sorry.
Lee,
Yeah,
can we open this up to questions?
absolutely. I was just finishing.
Yeah, I thought so. And the other thing is, you started a whole thread on the chat here about time machines. There's like 4 or 5 people talking about the time machines out there. So
Yeah.
And for those of you who are not from Wisconsin, the time machine was our ATM network in the 80s and 90s, and so we had a whole conversation going on the chat line on that. So I'm going to open up, unmute everybody. If anybody has a question for Lee, please. You want to finish up real quick, and then we'll open up for questions?
Oh yeah, I was just saying that's sort of how they stayed relevant. And you look, the one team that won right after Harry left was a team that won 92 games. All of those guys were drafted by Harry, and the ones who weren't were signed. But the bulk of that team that made that run in 92, Pat Listash, Greg Vaughn, John Jaha, Cal Eldred, they were all drafted at the end of Harry Dalton's tenure in Milwaukee. So
I know the book is a ways off yet, and when we first started talking about this I was down here in Phoenix over the winter, so it was probably like January. I was excited about your book then, and we've had several good conversations since, so thank you. Questions for Lee?
Hey, I'll start. Mike Carey here.
hi, Mike.
Fascinating, and I'm exactly with Dennis. Looking forward to the book here down the road. But yeah, the one thing you didn't mention that I wanted to add, or at least my opinion, is when you look back at those great, what I'm going to call late 80s teams, the Brewers did have that great minor league system, but unfortunately they never really benefited by trading many of those players for what I'm going to call experienced big league players. It's kind of funny now. That's seemingly what so much of baseball talk is all about. Hey, we've got these prospects, and if you don't play them, you trade them off and you get somebody good. And like you said, they kind of got hit with the injury bug and never truly produced. But that was, to me, that was their one major mistake looking backwards now. Where, boy, if they could have made some of those trades, what could they have been?
Well, and I think here's the thing too that you got to remember is that the system was evolving. I don't know if everyone thought, hey, I can trade these pieces off for big league talent. Today, that's a common occurrence.
Yep.
Today, you look at it and they go, hey, we've got 5 prospects or 3 prospects in the top 100. Let's go out and get us an arm. Before, it was still this way when Harry was there, they were still in the mode of let's develop these guys for our own benefit. Let's bring up the Juan Nieveses. Let's go get the Teddy Higueras. Let's go bring up Glenn Braggs and Greg Vaughn. And it wasn't, I don't think it was the mindset to, hey, now we're going to flip these guys and get the pieces. The one deal that Harry, the one move in 91 that Harry wanted to make, it was even hard to get people called up, I think, sometimes. The one move that Harry wanted to make in 91 was to call up Cal Eldred at the end of the season and see if he could parlay that into a couple of wins and maybe get them into the playoffs. And, it was just, it's not ready, and ownership kind of put the kibosh on the deal and what have you. So, yeah, they didn't, but I don't know how relevant that was across the board. I don't know how much of a strategy that had become by that point. That, hey, we're going to develop this talent and then flip it for other pieces. Where today, that's a very common thing. Obviously, Milwaukee does it all the time. They may do it again this winter. You never know with Josh Hader. Those things happen more relevant now than they did back then, I think. Good question.
Max.
First of all, well done, Lee. Nice to finally meet you after corresponding with you on Facebook for
a
for
bunch
any
of
number
people
of
on
years.
here that I know but have never met. So it's nice to see you.
We still haven't met.
Yes, absolutely.
And so,
I love your painting.
giddy up.
Yeah.
So anyway, my question has to do with Harry Dalton cut his eye teeth in the Baltimore Orioles organization at a time they were known for the Oriole way. And
Yep.
a lot of the personnel that he brought with him to Milwaukee, whether it was George Bamberger, whether it was Andy Etchebarren, even somebody like Ray Pointevent, had come from the Orioles organization.
Yep. Walter
In between-
Yaus, Walter Shannon.
Yes.
Yep.
In between, he was with the California Angels, a team that had a lot more financial resources than the Milwaukee Brewers did. And yet, the Brewers from 1978 to 1983, with the possible exception of Baltimore, they were the best team in the American League.
Yep.
Well, the Angels, during Harry Dalton's tenure there, I don't even think they cracked 500 once. Why did they do so well in Milwaukee without deep pockets and so poorly in California with deep pockets?
I asked a couple people about that. And the answer I got was twofold. One, and Pat will attest to this. Pat told me, she goes, Gene was a very nice man, Gene Autry. He was a very nice man, but he didn't want to wait. And I think given the time, Harry's best teams are a hybrid of free agent or existing talent and minor league talent that they had developed. And Gene felt, and he was pulled in a bunch of, Ross Newhan, who spoke to me about that time in California. Ross and Harry actually had one sort of defining moment that wasn't too good. Ross took some liberties with some of Harry's notes one night at his house and ran them in the paper the next day and didn't endear himself. And Ross actually apologized to me and to the Daltons through me for doing that. He realizes that now that's something that he can't believe he did. But one thing that he told me is that in California, Harry was never really allowed to do what he wanted. There was always a lot of input from not only Gene Autry, but from a lot of other people. Buzzy Bavasi was a very derisive factor in Harry's time in California. As it got later on, Buzzy wanted to get back into baseball, and he developed a relationship with Gene Autry, where he basically told Gene, hey, hire me and I will watch over Harry so that he doesn't spend all your money. Because he's given money. He's given $1 million out to Bobby Grich, and he's given $1 million out to Don Baylor, and he's given all this money to Nolan Ryan. He goes, man, if you had that money, you would be so much better off. He's wasting your money. There was a letter in Harry's things from an anonymous source that basically said everyone in Baltimore hated him. The people that you got working for you in California, they all hate Harry Dalton. He's worked over everybody. Nobody wants to talk with him. And when I asked the girls or Pat if they had an idea who wrote this letter, they said, was it Bussy? So I think that was part of the thing, is you had an ownership who wanted to win right away. So what Harry did was he outlaid a bunch of money to Don Baylor, to Bobby Grich. But then what happened was the ownership didn't wait for the farm system to mature. They had some injuries that they didn't quite account for or couldn't account for. Baylor was hurt for much of his early time in California. Grich had gotten hurt. In fact, when I talked to Bobby, he said his biggest thing when he came back from injury and later in his career in California was to prove Harry Dalton wasn't an idiot, that Harry Dalton knew what he was doing, because everybody looked and said, what's he got us playing this Grich for? He's not on the field. He can't hit. He's not doing anything. When I talked to Nolan Ryan, to give you an idea about Harry's time in California, Max, when I talked to Nolan Ryan, Nolan summed it up this way. He said, yes, we didn't win when Harry was here. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But any winning we did after was due in large part to the fact that Harry had been here. So they were good in 78. They were good, obviously, in 82. They were good in 86. And that was started under Harry. So as far as why he wasn't very good, I think it's a mix of things. And the California period is a really interesting time because you have the one time in a guy's career where he didn't win. And so you go, why is that? And so it was because there was all this confluence of other things.
How about one more question, and then we have Matt on deck. So anybody else have a question?
I just wanted to ask, do you have any idea when your book will be out?
Yeah, it should be out. I'm hoping by 2022. Nebraska's gonna put it out, and it'll take about a year from when I get it to them for them to put it out. So I'm hoping by about 2022.
About the time we come out of our houses.
Yep.
Okay.
I didn't hear what you said, Dennis.
I said it's about the time we come out of our houses.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully, yes.
Real quick, Pat, did you have anything you'd like to add to what Lee said?
She does have a few problems with her voice, Dennis, so it
Okay.
may be a little difficult for her to.
Okay. Well, Pat, we're honored that you're here. And Lee, thank you very much for inviting her, and thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, it's a lot of fun. I like talking to Harry. I could talk about Harry all night.
Oh, you and I have had some great conversations the last few months on that too. So I was looking forward to tonight. So thank you very much. So
Yep.
Thank you, Lee. Round of applause to you. A great job. Next up, Matt Bednarski. Matt, how in the heck are you?
I'm doing well, Dennis. Thanks. It's been a while. As I wrote in my my short biography for this meeting, I've been kind of an on again, off again member of the chapter for some time, and other family obligations keep me from doing this when I want to. But I'm here tonight and happy to be here.
Well, you're what I call our poster child for younger members. You were younger when you were, I think, in school yet, then you got married and career and family, and you go through that whole stage, So
Yep.
we all went there. We all understand. So that's perfectly understandable.
And my two oldest sons have been to chapter meetings about when they were about four months old each. So so I started them very young.
Well, I'm sure they have vivid memories of it also. Matt's going to be talking about Robin Yount's historic season as a shortstop, but I'll let you do the talking on that. Real quickly, just your bio, as it says, is that you could be nothing other than a Brewers fan, as your hometown team made it to Game 7 of the World Series in 1982 when you were 8 years old. So you hate the Cardinals more than the Cubs.
That's a tough question to answer, but probably yes.
My son was 7. He hates the Cardinals more than
Yeah.
From there, his love of baseball and the Brewers grew mostly through baseball cards, and in 2003, he joined SABR and the chapter. He's been on again, off again, as he mentioned, participating in chapter meetings and even SABR Nationals when allowed, when he has time. He and his wife are raising 3 boys and a girl in Tosa, where wiffle ball games are regular occurrences in the backyard, which sounds like fun. I want to start you out with the same 2 questions because you signed in a little after Lee started. You didn't hear the questions, so you didn't have time to prep for them.
No.
The first question is, what is your earliest baseball memory?
Honestly, and we'll talk about it a little bit today, it is game 163 in 1982. 1982 is about when I really first started following baseball, and that game, watching Robin hit 2 home runs and carry that game was just amazing and just really kind of stoked the fires for me.
So I think we know the answer to this question before I who is your favorite team and favorite ball player at age 12?
At age 12, it was still Robin. So I think, who did we have a few months ago, the Brewers beat writer who mentioned growing up, you're either a Robin Yount fan or a Paul Molitor fan. And I'm squarely in that Robin Yount camp. And I'll actually talk a little bit about that during this presentation, but it was definitely Robin.
Okay. Well, you've got the floor. Let's talk about Robin. I'm going to mute everybody again, and then we'll open up for questions.
Can you free it up for me to share the screen?
If I know how to do that. How do I do that?
Oh,
Share.
boy.
I don't know. Here, hang on here. I got to share screen. One participant can share at a time. Advanced sharing. I've got.
No, now it's available. Now I can do it.
Okay.
You freed it up somehow. So
Okay.
do you see my screen?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Okay, good. So today it was kind of billed as a research presentation, but I'm really going to be telling you all a story. And it's a story of one of my trips down the baseball reference rabbit hole. Or what does Marty Conlon have to do with the 82 Brewers? And I think everybody kind of knows what the baseball reference rabbit hole is. It's when you have a question and you fire up a browser and you go to baseball reference and you answer the question, but something else catches your eye and you click that link. And then, you scroll down the page after you click that link and something else catches your eye. And you keep clicking until about 90 minutes later, you forgot why you even fired up the computer in the first place. And so this is a story of that and how I came to kind of realize some things about Robin Yount's 1982 season that I hadn't realized before. And maybe some people here on the call tonight know all about this, but it was new to me. Let's see if I can advance the slides. There we go. So before we get going, all the data and the tables that you'll see are from Baseball Reference and from StatHead Baseball. StatHead it used to be called the Play Index. It was embedded in Baseball Reference, and I have a subscription there and use that tool to come up with some of the tables here. So Marty Conlon. So who is Marty Conlon? First of all, he was a basketball player. He was a journeyman, played in 9 NBA seasons, and played in Europe for 5 seasons, and kind of unremarkable stats, about 6.5 points a game, 17 minutes a game. And he was most famously known for having this very unique free throw shooting style. There's lots of references to this style on the internet if you do go searching for Marty Conlon. Marty played in Seattle, Sacramento, Charlotte, Miami, Boston. He played for the Clippers, and he played for the Bucks. And that's the reason why I, connected the dots between Marty Conlon in the 82 Brewers, because in April, when we were all quarantined and sitting around our homes and was searching for something to do without sports, some friends of mine and I started a bit of a text message trivia game where we would come up with a random Bucks, Brewers, or Packers player of the day. The more obscure, the better, and put out some trivia about that player, and the others would have to guess who it was. And if you guessed it right, you got to pick the next player. And Marty Conlon was the very first player that came up on that list. So we talked about people like Conlon and Tim Thomas from the Bucks, and Vince Workman, and Bryce Popp from the Packers. We talked about Moose Haas a little bit for the Brewers. And we talked about, when it was my turn, this player. For my random player of the day one time, I used number 27, as you see here, random Brewer of the day, played 4 seasons in Milwaukee. In 2005, I thought this was interesting. Of course, I pulled this from Baseball Reference. Led the National League in putouts by a center fielder, fielding percentage by a center fielder, and double plays turned as an outfielder. And first of all, does anybody want to guess or who that is? Before I keep going.
Free agent.
Brady Clark.
That's Brady Clark. Yes, very good. Brady Clark was one of my favorite players. And the reason he was one of my favorite players is that in 2005, I was a full season ticket holder for the Brewers. And one of the perks that they gave season ticket holders was during a Brewers road trip, you got to bring a guest and go down on the field at Miller Park, as it was called then, and take batting practice. And the guys.
Sorry, Matt, I tried to mute everybody. I think I muted you too. Can you
That's
unmute?
all right. That's all right. So I'm not sure what you heard and didn't hear, but I got to take batting practice on the field at Miller Park and got to use Brady Clark discarded a bunch of newly delivered Louisville sluggers that didn't meet his standards. And they were sitting around the clubhouse, and we got to swing Brady Clark bats at Miller Park and try to hit one out, which of course nobody came close, but it was a great perk of a season ticket holder at the time. Let's try to see if I can advance this. So that really got me thinking and going down that rabbit hole about who else were the center fielders in Milwaukee around that time. And you can see here that the most recent decade, we've got some pretty familiar names, including, down near the bottom, that Carlos Gomez and Niger Morgan combination, the one that really kind of excited us, got us, won that walk-off game winner in 2011. There's a name, there's a very forgettable 2016 Kirk Neuenhuis season. Barely remember that, and that was just a few years ago. The decade that preceded that, there was a lot of more household names, I guess. There was some perennial all-star type players in Mike Cameron and Devon White. Some players who really had their primes before they got here, but were still great players, like Marquise Grissom. There's the aforementioned Brady Clark. There's Scott Basenik, who finished second as the Rookie of the Year. And kind of decade and a half before that, we see Grissom again. We see some of my other favorite players like Darryl Hamilton and Jeremy Burnitz. Yeah, Burnitz, think of him as a right fielder, but he was a Brewers' primary center fielder in '97, or at least he played the most games there. And then you kind of see this big block. Robin Yount manned the position for 7 straight seasons. And that's kind of unique in this whole list here. You don't even see that big block of year over year the same player. The other thing you kind of see in this list is something that I kind of always found fascinating. That the Brewers did this with 3 players. They took a shortstop and put him in center field with Yount, with Pat Listash, and with Bill Hall. So between Yount and Kane, who, I'm hoping, COVID aside, Kane is here for a few more years at least. There's 24 different seasons between those two. and there's 15 different primary center fielders. And I wouldn't exactly characterize that as a revolving door, but it certainly is a lot of different players playing center field, and it really made me think about it a little bit. And so again, that sort of that block of Robin Yount for 7 seasons just stood out to me. And looking, previous to Yount, it was Rick Manning and another center field icon in Milwaukee, Gorman Thomas. Of course, those 2 players were traded for one another. But hadn't done it in some time. It had been a number of years since I actually looked at his stats. And so I did. I wanted to look at Robin's stats again. And here's, the first thing that comes up on Baseball Reference. These are some very familiar numbers to Brewer fans for sure. So 285 batting average, led the team in home runs for quite some time with 251. Of course, he's a Hall of Famer and an MVP. Won some Silver Sluggers. He went to some All-Star games. Another one of the reasons I really liked Robin was right here, as his birthday is the day before mine. And when I was growing up, my 2 favorite players were Robin Yount and Ryne Sandberg. And my birthday is like the meat in a Robin Yount, Ryne Sandberg birthday sandwich. So the 16th is Robin, the 17th is me, and the 18th is Ryne Sandberg. And then I scrolled down and I looked at all, the sort of traditional statistics that come along when you first fire up Baseball Reference. And, one of the things that really I started looking at was the season prior to 1982, or the seasons prior to 1982 when Robin was still a young pup. And it really caught my eye. The 74 through 79 seasons, because he really wasn't very good, at least with the bat. And what really caught my eye was these really extremely low slugging percentages. And I guess that was sort of par for the course for middle infielders in the 70s, but really kind of contributed to, using the measure of OPS plus, just sort of being, average or below average. When looking at his OPS. So looking at home run totals, really never getting out of the single digits for quite some time. Now he's very young, of course, but there's also, that his game looked very different as he got into the 80s and got, into his mid-20s. Kind of the pedestrian looking batting averages for sure, on base percentage below average, and that slugging was very low as you can see. But then, something changed in 1980. In 1980, he really kind of figured it out. He led all of baseball in doubles with 49. That's what the bold and italic number indicates there. And his slugging percentage jumped all the way up to 519. He was kind of sitting in those 300s. He kind of crept over 400 there for the 78 season, but in 1980, over 500. And so clearly he was starting to figure something out about that time. And just to kind of show how sort of middle of the road or even below average he was, these are his stats from 74 through 79. And that OPS plus during those seasons was 89. And of course, OPS plus of 100 is league average, and anything below that is below average. So he was about 11% below average at that time. So then I started looking in the 1980 and beyond, and that's when you start seeing things like MVP consideration. He won a Silver Slugger in 1980 with that 519 slugging average, and you really start to see during the 80s how he really figured it out. A lot of that came with maturity and age. I don't know. I think it was too young to really kind of know if there was something else that triggered that. But in the decade of the 80s, Robin on average hit 305 with a 365 on base and slugged almost 500. And that OPS plus was very good, 35% above the league average. Going back to all those stats once again, down here they note bold seasons are league leading seasons, and italics are leading all of baseball. You can see that's kind of peppered all throughout this table. Led the league in games, played a bunch of times. Talked about how he led the league in doubles in 80. He did again in 82. But one kind of grouping of bold and italic numbers stuck out to me, and again, it kind of surrounded that slugging average. And these are his rate stats in 1982. He had 331, pretty famous statistic in Milwaukee, but he slugged 578 and his OPS was 957. And both of those numbers led all of baseball, which made me just wonder how often does a shortstop lead all of baseball in slugging? Well, just that season, you can see he bested, future Hall of Famers like Dave Winfield and Eddie Murray in slugging by a lot, by 17 or 18 points in slugging, and in OPS topped Eddie Murray and Dwight Evans. And if you add in the National League players, there's a few more that creep closer. Nobody gets better than Winfield's second place, but Mike Schmidt got a little bit closer in OPS. So Robin, and then if you look at this list, it's a lot of first baseman, third baseman, a lot of outfielders. There's the occasional, I guess maybe one catcher there with Lance Parrish, and only one middle infielder, and he was top of the list.
So this was 82.
This is the box score from game 163. And then, that, of course, I mentioned at the top of the presentation, was very famous. He had 2 home runs and he hit a triple. He added 11 total bases in 4 at-bats. And his slugging percentage went up by 14 points in just that one game. He went from a 564 to 578 just after that one game. Adding those 11 total bases. It's kind of remarkable for that late in the season. So then I started sorting shortstop seasons just to see how remarkable that was. And you can see Robin Yount.
Pretty good,
This is through 1982. So since then, of course, there's been a lot of slugging shortstops. But up to 1982, when this happened, he had the 7th best slugging average of any shortstop. Anybody who played shortstop primarily for a full season since the year 1900. And then you'll see there's only 2 bolded numbers ahead of him, Ernie Banks and Archie Vaughan. So that was only the 3rd time a shortstop led the majors in slugging average since 1900. And breaking it down by OPS, he had the 8th best OPS and was only the 2nd time, 3rd time, tied with Wagner, where a shortstop led all of the Major League Baseball in OPS. Now, that was a stat in 1982 that nobody talked about, but kind of in retrospect, we can see just how great that season was. The components of slugging, of course, are in total bases, and I mentioned he tacked on 11 at the end of the final game of the season. His 367 total bases rank 2nd all time.
This is what I didn't want to do.
Shortstops.
I didn't want to get on there and just show people slides.
Right.
Sorry, got a little distracted there.
I can turn this down.
I add in all the seasons since 1982. You can see there's some pretty powerful slugging shortstops that kind of fill in ahead of Robin, but only one more led the league, and that is Alex Rodriguez in 2003 with 600. So even since then, Robin is still one of only 4 shortstops ever to lead the league in slugging. OPS, you can see the same thing. He moves down the list a little bit, but not much. And he's still top 10 ever as a shortstop in total bases, which I just find remarkable. It's something I never knew about that season until I just started looking kind of deeper and deeper at that Baseball Reference page So that's the end of the story. So we started with Marty Conlon, and we got to slugging shortstops in the end. And that's really what I find that the Baseball Reference site can do to me. It's something that can really make time disappear when I really start clicking at things.
Yeah. Matt, when you look at this screen here, Alex Rodriguez did it 4 times or so. He's really the 5th. There's only been 5 players. He's the 5th highest as a player.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you start to see other names in there. Jimmy Rollins really had a great season in terms of total bases. You see guys you kind of sneak in there at Rich Aurelia at number 11. I never would have guessed that. I guess I don't remember how great a season he had, but certainly accumulated a lot of total bases. But
any questions for Matt?
I have one actually. Matt, did Marty Conlon play with Danny Shays, or was he played later?
I think it was later. I believe, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay, I think you might be right. I was trying to remember, and they were very similar players, so I might have gotten them intermixed. But this is just a really interesting list to break it down like this, because you don't really get an idea of how good the person actually was. So great presentation. I will say this just real quick in passing. When I talked to Robin, he said that playing center field was the most uncomfortable he ever felt on a baseball diamond. And he felt that way from the day he started playing until the day he retired. He just didn't take to it, and yet was able to produce some great moments. So thanks again for helping us relive it.
Yeah, and remember when they first moved him to the outfield, they tried him in left field because he didn't have at that point, because of the injury, the greatest arm. So they put him in left, and I know he really struggled offensively during that first experiment there. And I feel like when they moved him to center, even though he still felt uncomfortable, I think he started to shine again. One of the I think interesting things about his career is he's got this grouping of awards or MVP votes in the early 80s when he was really starting to figure it out at shortstop, and then he did so again towards the sort of middle end of his career, just kind of winning that MVP in '89. Regardless if you think that somebody else should have won it, he really was starting to play well again towards the end of the 80s, and getting those MVP votes. I think that these two groupings just kind of stood out to me too, because you don't see that very often.
Who broke Robin's team record of 251 home runs? Was it Ryan Braun?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, before that happened, I had a favorite trivia question. There were 2 players at that time in Major League Baseball who led their team in all-time in singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. One of them was Robin Yount, and the other one was Stan Musial. But now that no longer stands.
Yeah.
What year was Robin going to quit and play golf? It was right around, that was his early years.
1980.
When was it?
1980?
Yeah, was it?
Yeah, that I don't know, but of course 1980 is when
so.
kind of turned the corner there, stats wise.
Actually, I think when he was threatened to play golf, that was when he was still a teenager.
Yeah, I want to say like 76 maybe.
I think you're right.
When did Molitor come up? Because that played a role.
Yeah, that was part of it, yeah.
It was after Harry had gotten there, because the girls asked me to ask Robin what his reaction was when he told Harry. So it would have been about 78.
Yeah.
And Robin just kind of laughed and pushed the question aside. But yeah, it was, I want to say it was probably closer to 78, because Harry was there at the time.
Any other questions for Matt? Matt, thank you. Round of applause here. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to kill your share screen.
There you go. I stopped it on my own.
Thank you very much. Very well. Couple of quick announcements, and then we started a tradition. I'm going to turn the recording off soon of what I call bar time. Usually when we had a chapter meeting, we'd have a meeting, we'd have all this kind of presentations and all, and then we go to the bar and swap lives or talk baseball or a little of both. And so before we start that part of the meeting, just a couple announcements. I'm working on November meetings right now. I'm actually working on October, but not sure I can pull it off. We now have 4 Wisconsin players who had their debuts in the major leagues this year. I'm trying to get a panel of them. I'm not sure how to reach them. I've sent things to them on Twitter and all. No clue if they're going to respond. That's what I'm trying for October. November right now, we have Stu Thornley booked for the 11th or for the 12th to talk about official scoring. He's going to give us a test. And Jim Flanagan, who's the VP of minor league operations, who's been at the Brewers since he was a bat boy, is probably going to be speaking to us about being farm director later in November is what we're looking at this time. So, listeners, I'm going to turn off recording. Does anybody have anything they want to talk to about baseball? The last score I saw was 3-2.